What if the only friend you had as a child grew up into something you could no longer control? Today, I'm joined by returning guest Christy Aldridge. Her latest novel, Boo, blends supernatural horror with deep emotional trauma, telling the story of a boy, a monster, and the terrifying bond that follows him into adulthood. So without further ado, I give you Christy Aldridge. Christy, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me back.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining me today on this 13th day of April 2025. I looked it up and saw you were the 16th guest on the show when it first started. So, needless to say, it's been quite a while since you've first been on. So I was excited to see you had a brand new novel out, and having only read your short fiction before, I couldn't wait to dive into your long-form work. And what I found was a slow burn, supernatural creature feature that really tugged at the heartstrings, especially with the story of a young boy and what seemed to be his only friend growing up. As emotional as it was also violent and terrifying. So thank you for coming on the show today to discuss this incredible work.
Well, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, so the story follows both the young and older versions of a man named Joe who endured a traumatic childhood. Raised by a single mother due to his father being absent due to alcoholism, Joe was bullied at school and struggled to make friends. One day, while waiting for his dad to visit, he explores a shed and discovers a wooden box covered in arcane carvings. He hides it, planning to examine it later, and when he finally opens it in his room, the box appears empty until he notices a terrifying monster standing nearby. And that's where the story begins. So, the story begins with Joe, his fiancée Marissa, and his soon-to-be stepdaughter Olivia moving into a new home. Joe is taking on a lot of responsibility. Did you see Joe's desire to take care of Marissa and Olivia as a form of redemption or escape from his past, or maybe a bit of both?
Definitely a bit of both, but I think leaning more towards redemption. You know, he grew up watching his dad make every mistake possible. That I think is one of those things where he grew up and was like, I'm not making this mistake. I'm going to be the dad that I should have had as a child.
Yeah, I find myself trying to do the same thing. And I remember hearing a wise man say, I guess it probably translates to daughters as well, but definitely sons. Initially, they idolize their father, then they demonize their father, then they humanize their father. And I think I'm probably in the humanized state where I find myself in a lot of ways becoming him, not in like the real bad ways, but like the ways where I can see, yeah, this is where he kind of isolates from people. I don't know. How about you? What do you think about that?
Yeah, definitely. I can see the same thing with my mom, although I don't think I demonized her much. But I definitely feel like I'm at that part where I humanize her more. I'm like, I get why she did this thing and that thing. And same thing for Joe and even later on, I guess maybe Olivia.
Gotcha. Well, being in a relationship with a woman and her daughter naturally brings some complications, especially in the form of baby daddy drama with a man named Steve. Steve is clearly a complicated figure in the story, absent for years, and then suddenly reappearing once Joe and Marissa start building a life together. Did writing Steve challenge your own views about fatherhood, responsibility, or redemption in any way?
Very much so with the redemption aspect. Steve started off as just typical jealous ex type of baby daddy character. But obviously, when you begin to write something, characters form themselves. And I realized that there was actually a lot more to Steve that I should have touched on, but it probably wouldn't have added much to the story. I still think that you can understand that, like, Steve isn't doing the best, but he's trying his best.
And what was behind his timing? Like, was it just a coincidence that right as she was moving in and kind of starting over with another man that had taken on not only the role of husband, but also as father? Was that a coincidence, or did he become aware of it and get, that anxiety, that jealousy of somebody else raising his daughter that caused him to start coming around again?
Well, I think while writing it, my idea was just that it was coincidence. But to be fair, it could probably go either way because nothing makes you want to almost do better than seeing somebody else in the position that you want to be in.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's an interesting interplay with the timeline in the book. The chapters alternate between the present and Joe's childhood, gradually inching closer and closer together. What impact did that back and forth structure have on your own understanding of Joe as a character? Did writing his past influence how you portrayed him in the present?
Yeah, when I first started, I attempted to write the book just going back and forth and playing off of each chapter until I got to the end, until I realized that wasn't working. I wasn't sure of who Joe was now because I didn't understand who he had been back then. So then I decided to write the book like the past first, and then I'd go back to the present. And by doing the past, I could see who Joe was and his childhood, his upbringing, all of the things that would later influence his present.
Was that technique exclusive to this book, or is that kind of your technique in general when you're writing?
No, this one was definitely exclusive to this book. Most of my stories are straightforward. So the past and present back and forth was definitely a new writing experience. But I do love how it turned out.
Yeah, definitely. Well, in both Joe's childhood and his adult life, there are two men arguing with their ex-wives about the ability to see their children. Joe's father during his childhood and Marissa's ex, Steve, in the present. Was that intentional from the start? And what did you want to explore through that mirrored dynamic?
Yeah, definitely was intentional. And I wanted sort of two different perspectives on that. So in the past, Joe was able to see his dad, who may not be the world's best dad, but he is a dad that cares about his son. He's able to see it from a child's perspective of not understanding why his dad isn't allowed to do this or that, or why his mom is constantly on him. As to where when he grows up, he can understand that perspective because now he's an adult looking at the same situation through his own experience, plus, it happening to a different child.
Gotcha. Well, there is a scene from Joe's childhood where for his birthday, his father gives him his own toolbox with actual tools, not just some Fisher-Price toy. There's sort of a quiet kind of inconsideration in the dad's gesture. He doesn't ask if it's okay, doesn't stay to supervise, and essentially hands over a new challenge to the parent doing the day-to-day work. Was that his father being manipulative, or was it an example of the emotional immaturity of an alcoholic?
Yeah, definitely the latter. I kind of seen Joe's dad as one of these guys, and this is definitely no offense to like all men, but there are certain guys that they talk about wanting to be a dad, but they don't actually want to be a parent. They just want to do, the fun stuff, and they want to, be the good dad and the fun dad and all of this. I kind of seen his dad as sort of that type of father.
Yeah, like not even really. I mean, I guess you can delineate dad from father, but it's almost like they want to be the cool uncle.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't count how many times I've taken my niece out for dinner, and we love Tex-Mex. So we've had like a big platter of sopapillas at the end, and then I drop her off at home just amped up on sugar. Enjoy.
Yeah, I'm an aunt, so same.
Yeah.
It's not my problem anymore.
It's so nice. It really is. Well, eventually, Joe's mother allows his dad to watch him after school instead of the grouchy trailer park owner, Agnes. But when his dad doesn't show up, Joe sneaks into an old shed and discovers a wooden box with arcane carvings. He brings it home, and after his mother tucks him in, he opens it, unleashing a terrifying monster. The monster in this scene is terrifying, not just because of how it looks, but because it doesn't go away when the lights come on. What inspired you to break that classic childhood rule about monsters disappearing in the light?
This kind of goes back to sort of a lore that I've set up in my Christy Universe of books.
Love the Christy Universe.
In my first, yeah, in my first short story collection, Kill My Darlings, I have a story in there called The Tommy Feast, in which I sort of created my own boogeyman lore that when you get the hiccups, if you don't scare them away, they escape and they go under the bed into the darkness, and that's where they grow and become the boogeymen that get in your closet and they hide under your bed and they're in the cabinets and all this. So kind of that's what I imagine Boo being. So maybe this is spoiler or whatever, but Boo isn't as imaginary as he seems. So I think in my group of boogeyman characters, Boo is one of those, certainly. And I just didn't see a need for it just to be confined to only being able to be seen in the dark and being that sort of scary. Because maybe with the fact that he is an imaginary friend, friends can come out in the light, monsters don't. That sort of thing, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, so in the way that fantasy authors not only do world building, but kind of structure this set of rules, you've kind of got your own dark fantasy like rule book for the way your supernatural realms operate.
Yep, very much.
You need to map that out one day.
I really do. I also have this whole plan for hell too, so.
Oh, really? Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
So the monster that we've been speaking about, Boo, follows Joe to school, and although he's afraid at first, Joe eventually gets used to it. He even begins to enjoy the monster's company, especially after realizing it protects him from Ricky, a boy who bullies him. There's a line where Joe compares the monster to humans who act like bigger monsters. How intentional was that theme that sometimes real people are more frightening than the supernatural?
Well, I guess I could say it wasn't intentional, but I think anybody that reads my work knows that whether it's intentional or not, a common theme that I write about is that humans are the biggest monster. That's just sort of a central theme through most of my writing. I think we talked about this when you reviewed All the Pretty Hells You See.
Yeah, and in All the Pretty Hells You See, weren't there a few stories that highlighted your belief or view that the loyalty of animals, the inherent good nature of animals is superior to humans?
Yeah, definitely. That's just sort of like a life philosophy for me. So it definitely comes out in my writing.
Yeah. Well, fast forward to the present day, Joe, feeling a bit morose about his past, decides to dig up some childhood belongings and comes across the box that once contained Boo. Believing Boo had been sealed inside and couldn't escape, he's violently surprised to find Boo alive and much older standing in front of him. Boo's return seems to bring not just fear, but something like love? Can you talk about that complex emotional bond between Joe and Boo and what it says about trauma and attachment?
Well, as you know, Joe is a lonely kid, basically. He's got a mom that works full time and over just to take care of them. He doesn't have any friends in school. His dad is absent most of the time. So even though when he first meets Boo, he's scared because, oh my God, it's a monster and all of this. Obviously, Boo is there and Boo cares for Joe in his own twisted way. He loves Joe, and Joe ends up loving him as well. And I think at first, maybe that love started just because it was the only thing around that was his friend, and it was truly his friend. And even though he's a child, as Boo starts to do these awful things, he's able to justify them because, his parents didn't stop Ricky from bullying him. His parents didn't stop Agnes from saying mean things about him and things like that. And then, obviously, when he grows up, he has that more adult mentality. He can see how things were bad, but I think there's still that nostalgia that he can remember about his first friend, his at the time only friend. And despite all of the bad things, it's sort of like being in a toxic relationship that you can know how bad someone is, but like the emotion is still there. You still care for someone, you still love them. So definitely some trauma bonding keeps even present Joe attached to Boo.
Yeah. Are you part of the, along with me, part of the toxic relationship club? Not currently, obviously, but in the past.
Yeah, in the past I have been. Definitely not now. Healthy green flags all around in my current relationship.
Absolutely. Well, Joe is deeply concerned about Boo's dangerously protective nature, especially when it comes to Marissa and Olivia. How much of Boo's protectiveness is rooted in love, and how much of it is tied to something darker, like control or obsession?
I think in the past, it started off, at least from Joe's perception, it started off as love. So Boo isn't human. He doesn't have these human moralities like we do. And Joe is a child and doesn't completely understand, good and bad. Like he knows things are good and he knows things are bad, but like there is that gray area of this person was hurting me, this thing got rid of it. But I think that definitely there's a lot of obsession and also probably possession on Boo's part. Because although I set it up as when Joe opens the box, Boo belongs to him, I think there's sort of a trade-off in that as well. As when he opens the box, Boo may belong to him, but that also means that he belongs to Boo. And Boo is going to protect him no matter what the cost because he sees Joe as his.
And this is kind of, I guess, going off in the weeds. It's just something I was thinking about. I don't think it's addressed in the book, but you mentioned on the box, like I said earlier in the introduction, there's some arcane symbols, almost as if like his existence or at least his release into this world might be somehow related to the occult in some way. Did you have that floating around in your mind?
I can't say that I did to start off with. I kind of more envisioned it of like a genie in a bottle. So like whatever he was, the box was his confinement, and you had to open it to release him. And that sort of thing. But definitely, I like leaning into occult things, so I could see in the past that it could have been more of that.
Awesome. Well, that's what I'm going with. And some incantation.
Well, I'm not going to ruin it for you.
Yeah, he was brought straight from hell. No, just playing. Well, without giving away any spoilers, the reason Joe is so worried about Boo's reappearance is because of some horrific things Boo did in the name of protecting Joe when he was a child. Joe's discomfort around Boo is rooted in history that the reader slowly uncovers. What was your strategy for building suspense around what Boo really did in Joe's childhood?
So, like I said, I wrote the past first. So when I got to the present, my idea was that it would be like tit for tat. So anytime that there was like coming up a point where in the present Boo was going to do something bad, I wanted in the past for you to see what he had done before to justify why, Joe is scared of this thing happening because he remembers this happening in the past, and then it seems like a repeat in the present.
Yeah, and I was just thinking, not to get disorganized with my progression of questions, but I never did mention there's quite, as you're waiting for the information you get about his past and his present to get closer together to where the story fleshes out and starts making sense, there's quite a bit of a slow burn where it's almost like this is like real comfort horror. And then it starts just goes off the rails as far as like the violence and the action involved. Is that something you wanted, was to create kind of a slow burn, or is that just when you were fleshing it out, just the speed that you felt was necessary to flesh the story out?
I think that's just another one of those like writer quirks, because I'm a slow burn writer, sometimes too slow for some people. I definitely love building up to these horrific things. I like getting you all comfortable and everything's good. Oh, it's just a little creepy or whatever, and then bam, someone's dead.
Someone's more than dead. Good God. Well, how do Boo's actions as protector complicate Joe's own sense of right and wrong, especially now that he has a family to protect himself? He's kind of got to take things that he had to deal with in the past to where Boo is his protector because it didn't seem like those that were supposed to protect him were doing their job. Translate that to the present, when you're dealing with things that you can't exactly get the police involved in for various reasons, which I won't spoil. How does his own sense of right and wrong play itself out?
Well, as a child, obviously, he doesn't understand why these certain things can't be solved. But as an adult, Joe almost takes on the role that Boo had for him, but with Olivia and Marissa. So he wants to protect them no matter what. The only difference is that now he knows you can't kill people like Boo did. But when Boo comes back, obviously, he knows how Boo handles a situation. So he has to fight his own protective nature while Boo is also continuing to do his own protectiveness for Joe.
Yeah, and there's really no way, well, I mean, there probably is a way, but there's seemingly no way for him to explain to Boo that, like, here in civilized society, you can't just go around murdering people because he can't speak to them. There's just, like these not very emotional expressions that he'll give in response to things. Mostly, I think if I remember correctly, most of his responses to what Joe told him was just shrug his shoulders like, I don't know.
I don't know. That's not how it works where I come from.
Well, Boo is terrifying, but also sad and even loyal in a twisted way. What do you think he ultimately represents in Joe's life? Trauma, memory, protection, or something else entirely?
Actually, probably just a mix of all of it. Boo was there to be his friend. Boo was there to fix his problems. Boo was there to protect him and to comfort him. And all of these traumas that he also went through, Boo caused some of them. So I think Boo is almost like a personification of Joe's childhood as a whole, both good and bad.
Okay. Well, throughout the story, Joe is trying to build things, literally through his contracting business and metaphorically through his family. Boo, on the other hand, deconstructs. So, did you think of Boo as a direct counterforce to Joe's desire for stability? Or is Boo actually exposing the illusion of stability altogether?
That's actually a very good question. I don't know. I don't really see Boo so much as being destructive by his nature, because I think that Boo's entire being is just that he wants to protect Joe at any cost. He doesn't care who Joe cares about. He just wants to protect Joe, and Joe is his main priority. And a lot of Joe wanting to create things, I think, is because of his, obviously, his childhood and his dad and stuff, his parents, specifically his dad, destroying things, that Joe's thing is always that he wants to build it. And maybe indirectly, yeah, Boo is sort of a counter to that, because although maybe not intentional, Boo is very good at destructing the things around him for Joe's sake.
Yeah. Well, I guess in a sense, he's destroying in order to attempt to maintain stability for Joe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good way to, you know it better than I do.
Well, one of the things Joe eventually begins to notice is that while Boo clearly reacts to protect him, both in childhood and in the present, there's also a more premeditated psychological side to Boo. He doesn't just defend Joe, he torments people in subtle ways. Was this something Boo was always capable of that Joe wasn't aware of? Or is it something he learned and evolved into over time? As he got older, did he get a little bit Machiavellian?
I think Boo was always capable of it, because it is also hinted at Agnes's son that Boo has been owned by different people. So I think it's always been something of Boo's nature. But I also see Boo as sort of adopting the mindset of whoever owns him, and almost like, maybe not the mindset, but like the age. So as a child, he's not so much thinking about doing these more manipulative things. It's more you act out of emotion. And that's why, the childhood bad things that happen are more direct and emotional, and there's not a lot of manipulation in those. As to where when Boo comes back and Joe is older and Boo also appears older, adults are a little bit more scheming, conniving. So I think it's one of those things that Boo just sort of grew into and adapted at being that age.
And I'm trying to remember, Agnes's son, he was basically bedridden, right?
Yeah.
What was his condition?
Just basically madness. And I also think that he was like paralyzed in a sense, because he was bedbound. Like, he could not get up.
Mm-hmm. Was that as a result of Boo? Did Boo drive him to like this fractured state of mind?
Yeah, in my head, it was definitely that.
Okay. Well, Boo pushing people psychologically toward their own breaking point is a very human kind of cruelty. Were you ever worried that making the, quote, monster too human would blur the line too much between supernatural horror and psychological drama? Or was that exactly the line you wanted to walk?
Yeah, I definitely wanted to teeter totter on that line a little bit. Like I said, that whole humans are the real monsters, or humans can be worse than these supernatural type of monsters is definitely like a running theme that went wild in Boo.
Hmm. Well, in addition to the responsibilities of family life and dealing with a violent monster, Joe also owns a contracting company and employs a worker named John, who's an irresponsible drunk, much like his father was. So, what were you trying to explore by including that parallel?
I liked the idea that Joe, despite his shortcomings, that Joe loved his dad and had the idea that if someone had helped his dad the way that he was trying to help John, that things would have turned out differently. And for Joe, John was that present day version of his dad. So he tried to be the person that he had wished his dad would have had. And obviously, with John, just like anyone that might have been for his dad, he sees that you can't always save someone, that people have a choice in how they react in their lives and the choices that they make.
So, in a sense, he was kind of doing what we were talking about earlier. He was humanizing his father by trying to see him through another human being, like in active addiction, kind of having the same problems.
Yeah, definitely.
Gotcha. Well, eventually, Joe cannot ignore John's negligence and is forced to fire him, something Joe finds very difficult as his heart often seems to override his brain, if you'll excuse the expression. Joe struggles with confrontation even when it's justified. How much of that is tied to his past, and how much of it is just who he is as an adult trying to hold everything together?
Definitely a lot of it is tied to the past because as a child, we see that Joe does everything he possibly can to avoid confrontation. And he tries to be the best child that he knows how to be. And as an adult, obviously, he wants everything to just be stable and to be normal. And he fights for that no matter what he has to do. We see it with Marissa a lot. The parallel like between Marissa and his mom is that Joe has this mentality that comes from his childhood of like trying to make their lives as easy as he possibly can. Like he goes out of his way to try to take care of them. It comes from his childhood of him wanting his present to be normal and easygoing as possible.
Well, firing John came with serious consequences. One morning, Joe walks outside to find all four of his tires slashed. The sabotage of his truck feels like more than revenge. Was it important for you to highlight how vulnerable Joe really is, even as an adult?
Yeah, because Joe, he's passive. That's what Joe is passive. And I think Joe, even though he grew up with all of these bad things happening to him, I think Joe is the type of person that tries to see the good in everything and he tries to trust people. He's a little naive. So having John be able to do that to him, I think was definitely a way of showing Joe that he doesn't have quite as good a handle on his life as he thinks he does.
Well, there's a lot of terrifying elements in the book, different strains of terror, for lack of a better term. Joe is constantly trying to hold it all together, his business, his family, and his sanity. Was that emotional juggling act something you aim to highlight as its own kind of horror?
Yeah, because how awful is it to try and keep peace when your entire life is just 1 inch away from falling apart?
Yeah, it was pretty bad. At one point I thought, I'm going to try to dance around spoilers here, but at one point I thought, I was like, man, all of this stuff he's going through and how hard he's trying. And Marissa is just being ridiculous. There's a reason for it, but at first I was like, you know what? maybe I'm just like prejudiced because I'm a man. I was like, give the guy a fucking break.
No, that was kind of intentional because Joe, he's very passive and he's very easygoing and all of this. And Marissa definitely is not. She has reasoning for some of it, but, Marissa is high maintenance. And in my brain, I was like, the type of character that Joe is, that is the type of woman that he's going to find.
Oh, yeah, yeah. When they say opposites attract, I think they're talking about like levels of aggression, like passive versus aggressive. Because if you have two passive people together, doesn't work. Two aggressive people together, hell no, that does not work at all.
Absolutely not.
Well, the story blends psychological horror with supernatural elements. Which side do you personally find more unsettling?
Psychological, for sure.
Hell yeah.
Supernatural, I think you can kind of distance a little bit. You could be like, well, it's not actually real or whatever. Or if you believe it's real, you're like, oh, it has rules. Psychological is a little bit different. It's definitely real and it has no rules.
Yeah. Yeah, I love going down rabbit holes with Black Ops, CIA operations like MK Ultra, like what people have really done to people's minds. That's just terrifying to me.
Yep. I fall down the same holes.
Well, what was the most surprising thing you discovered about the story or the characters during the writing process?
I think probably the justification that we will make for things. Like, no matter how bad we know something is, or how awful it is for us, or how morally bad it is, the human brain can find a way to justify it into, well, it's not as bad as it seems.
Mm. Yeah, it's just weird how, like, not too long ago, probably about 10 years ago, I was in such denial, but it was like I knew it, but my denial was a transparent piece of glass. So even though I could see right through it, I was still taking comfort in that there was this form in front of me that I could separate me from the truth, even though I could see the truth right on the other side. So, well, circling back to the book, an interesting device you use in the story is not only the back and forth structure between Joe's childhood and his adult life, but also the use of echo transitions, where the final line of one chapter flows directly into the beginning of the next. It's a technique that really tightens the pacing and deepens immersion. So structurally, the story moves between past and present while keeping an emotional through line. How important was it for you to maintain that momentum, and did these transitions help with that?
I saw it as very important because, like I said, I tend to write as a slow burn type of writer. And I knew that already going back and forth can sometimes be a little jarring. So the idea was that if each sentence sort of flowed into the next sentence, no matter whether you were going from past to present, present to past, you kept that sort of train of thought almost. It all melded together.
Well, the transitions between Joe's childhood and adulthood don't just serve the plot, they mirror emotional echoes, like trauma looping back in a new form. How did you map those parallels? Were you consciously tracking specific emotional beats across timelines? And I think I kind of asked you about this before, about having points that you wanted to reach.
Well, on a technical aspect, I had all of the past written, and that helped form the present. When I went to start, dispersing these chapters and entwining them, it was a thing of no matter how long or short a chapter had to be, I needed each one to sort of mirror the other. So in some cases, that would mean rewriting something to happen earlier or later so that it worked with whatever happened before and whatever happened after. And I don't honestly know how that all worked out, but my brain managed to make those things flow together.
Well, the cover is very creepy, and I know that in addition to writing, you run a graphic design service called Grim Poppy Design. So did you design this cover yourself? And let me, I want to bring it up here. There we go. Yeah, so can you tell me, did you...
There he is.
Yeah. Did you design this yourself, and can you kind of tell me about it?
Yes. I started off with sketching him out. I usually draw digitally, but I really wanted this book to have that sort of old school horror type of paperback feel, which is also why it's available in mass market size. So I sketched him out in my sketchbook, and then I attempted to color him there, but I suck at color pencils and things like that, so I moved him on over. But
Okay.
yeah, it was very important to me that Boo had a physical representation for people to look at him. And it's funny how many people that read the book before I did the cover, when they saw the cover, going, "Oh, that's what he looks like? I didn't expect him to be that scary."
Well, I mean, it makes sense to the reason why when Joe first sees him as a child, he screams bloody murder at the top of his lungs.
Yeah, it was so funny to me, the folks that read it before the cover, and they'd be like, "I didn't think that he would look that scary." I'm like, there is a reason that little 5-year-old kid was terrified.
Well, let's take a look at your website here, Grim Poppy Design, and I feel like I'm rehashing things from your previous interview. I think I may have asked you where Grim Poppy comes from, the name of the business, but for the listeners that don't know, and to refresh my memory because I'm getting old.
Yeah, I can't remember if we did. It was literally just random.
Okay. Unfortunately, we were unable to complete the episode due to weather-related technical issues. But if you're interested in Christy's work, all links are in the description. And a special thanks to Christy for joining me on the show. And thank you to everyone who tuned in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Be sure to tune in next Tuesday for a new episode featuring the best and brightest authors and filmmakers of dark literature and film. So until then, stay healthy, stay sane, and as always, thank you for listening. See you next time.